Welcome back to the Clinical Realist. I'm Dr. Sarah Matt. It's late April, and right about now, if your health system deployed a clinical AI tool in Q1, you're starting to notice something. The pilot worked. The go live went pretty reasonably well, and the vendor support team has been very responsive. Clinicians are using the tool less, but something's off. Not catastrophically off, just off enough that you are spending more time in conversations about the tool than you expected at this point. Clinicians are asking questions you don't have clean answers to, and the data is coming in, but nobody is sure what to do with it. The vendors, of course, still engaged, but you're starting to realize that their support model was built for go live and not for the 6-month steady state. If that description sounds familiar, what you're experiencing is a governance gap, not a technology gap, a governance gap. And the good news is it's fixable. The bad news is that the longer you wait, the more expensive it gets. Clinical AI implementations have a predictable pattern after go live. The first 4 weeks are usually the honeymoon phase. Things are new, people are engaged, the vendor is attentive. Issues get resolved fast, and the data looks better than expected because the early adopters are doing the heavy lifting. Then weeks 4 through 8 happen. The early adopters are no longer carrying the team. The full clinical population is using the tool now, or supposed to be. The vendor support team has deprioritized your account because go live is behind them. The implementation team has moved to the next project. And the first real data is coming in, not pilot data, not the first week's novelty data, actual production data from actual clinical operations. And it's raising questions. Why is the tool flagging this class of patients at a different rate than the pilot suggested? Why are these 3 clinicians using the tool in a way that was not in the training protocol? And why is the recommendation workflow generating pushback from the afternoon shift that the morning shift isn't experiencing? These are not technical questions. They're governance questions. And they require someone in the organization who has the absolute authority to look at them and look at the data, make a judgment about what it means, and decide what needs to be changed. If you built a governance structure before go live, you should have that person already, which is great. And that person has been looking at the production data since day one. They have a 30-day review built into the calendar, and they know exactly what they're seeing and what it means. If you didn't build that structure, you're probably improvising. And the questions are real. The data is real. But the person who's supposed to answer them doesn't have a clear mandate. The data review meeting is not on the calendar. And the question of why this is not working looks like it has never been formally defined. The 6 to 8 week window is when that improvisation becomes visible. Not because the tool failed, because the absence of governance becomes apparent in the data. Let me describe what a governance gap actually looks like in a live clinical environment, because it does not announce itself dramatically. It looks like this. The monthly data report from the AI vendor shows that utilization is lower than projected. The clinical champion opens the report, sees the utilization number, and is not sure what to do with it. They forward it to the IT director. The IT director sends it to the CIO. The CIO sends it back to the clinical champion with a note that says, "Can you look into this?" And the clinical champion sends an email to the physician population asking, "Is anyone having issues with the tool?" So then 3 responses come back. 2 are vague, and 1 is from the department chief who says, "We talked about this in last month's meeting." So no one knows what meeting that was, and nobody is following up. So 1 month later, the utilization number is lower, and the same loop repeats. This isn't negligence. Everyone in this loop is a competent professional doing their job the best they can. The problem is structural. There's no designated owner. There's no decision framework. And there's no defined threshold that triggers an actual formal review. There's no meeting with authority to even make a change. The governance gap is not a gap in talent. It's a gap in structure. Now let's contrast this with what a health system with pre-built governance looks like at the same moment. The monthly data report comes in, and the physician steward reviews it against the predefined performance benchmarks established at go live. Utilization is below benchmark. The steward calls a 45-minute governance review with 3 pre-named participants And at that meeting, they use a standard protocol to determine whether the utilization gap is adoption related, workflow related, or tool related. They assign an action to the responsible party within a 2-week resolution timeline. And the governance record is updated. Same data, completely different response, because the structure was built before the tool went live. Now, here's the economics question I get asked most often in this conversation. Is it worth building the governance structure after the fact? We're already live. Can we retrofit? Yes. Yes, yes, yes. You can retrofit. But retrofitting governance onto a live clinical AI tool, it's much harder than building it before go live, and it's a lot more expensive. And here's why. When you build governance before go live, you're building from a blank slate. You define what looks good before you have data. You name the steward before there's a crisis. And you establish the review cadence before there's a backlog. So the structure's clean. Now, you can retrofit, but when you retrofit, you're building governance while the tool is live, which means every structural decision you make immediately generates a question about the existing data. So what do we do with the last 6 weeks of utilization data that nobody reviewed? Do we apply the new governance framework retroactively? And who owns the backlog of unresolved clinical questions? You're building the safety net while people are already falling. It's still worth doing. And if you're, in this position right now, the answer is not to wait until Q3 and start fresh. No, don't do that. The answer is to build the structure as fast as possible and apply it from today forward. But the organizations that are not in this position spend a fraction of the retrofit cost building governance before go live. That's the strategic investment that looks expensive before implementation, but very obvious afterwards. So if you're listening to this episode and your organization is currently in the governance gap, here's the fastest way forward. Step 1, name the steward today, not tomorrow, today. Not a committee, one person, a clinician who has the clinical credibility, the organizational standing, and the time to function as the governance owner for this tool. A nurse, a doctor, a pharmacist, I don't care who it is, one person. Then give them the title and the authority in the same conversation. Step 2, schedule the darn governance review, the first one this week, and use the production data you have. Define the review questions in advance. What are we seeing in utilization? What are the edge cases that have come up in the last 6 weeks? What are the open clinical questions that nobody has actually answered? One meeting, 2 hours max. Document the outputs. And step 3, build the forward governance calendar. 30-day reviews, quarterly deep dives, an escalation protocol for the scenarios that trigger a pause. Put it on the calendar today, not tomorrow, today. Not when you have time to do it. You got to do it now. Do it now. Do it yesterday. And then step 4, define this is not working and what that looks like. This is the hardest conversation and probably the most important one. What performance threshold triggers an actual formal pause for assessment? What clinical outcome triggers immediate escalation? And what utilization floor represents a truly failed implementation? Define these thresholds before you get to them. It's much harder to find them after. 4 steps. You can have a functional governance structure running within 2 weeks from today. That's right, 2 weeks from today. The Q2 governance problem is predictable. It happens to most organizations that deployed clinical AI in Q1 without a pre-built governance structure. It's not a reflection of bad intent or bad tech. It's a structural gap that becomes visible at a specific moment in the implementation lifecycle. If your organization is in that gap right now, the fastest path out is a direct conversation about what the governance structure needs to look like for your specific situation. That's the work I do. Discovering clarity sessions at the link below. I'm Dr. Sarah Matt. This is the Clinical Realist, and I'll see you next week.